Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series to take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the adventure, The Sea Among Fae, designed by R.M. Sayan for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. The Sea Among Fae is a Tier 2 adventure, although I hesitate to even categorize it as Tier 2 because there is only one battle in this adventure, but it does scale between level 5 and 10. Presumably you could scale it for more levels than that because there's only the one combat encounter. This is a very, very story-heavy adventure, which I'll admit is not my usual cup of tea. Mainly because I think it is very challenging to craft a narrative-heavy adventure that still includes the players. And then that's really the balance between writing D&D content or, tabletop RPG content, is you're trying to strike that balance between creating a cool story and a place for your players to interact in, and not just making it so they're along for the ride, but then allowing them to make, choices and have an effect on the story, ideally. And, probably the best adventures usually do a combination of those things. You don't necessarily want your players to just run the entire ship, it's still the DM running things, but you do want to give them a lot of, relevant choices. It makes them feel like they're included and they've got all these cool steps they can make, little changes they can make along the way. I feel like this fails to do that. This one is more along the lines of you're just kind of a part of this story that the designer is definitely writing, and there's not a whole lot of actual choices or decisions players can make, most egregiously in the very first act, when it becomes very aware that the players are literally just searching for a missing person, and the people they need to talk to are just going to talk to them at some point later. So the entire point of the first act is just to wait around, like for things to happen. And that's not great game design for the players to feel like they're doing things, I guess. So there's a very long, interesting backstory about Davy Jones and this polyamorous relationship between I think it's a satyr, and then the Davy Jones character, and then a person who's in charge of this town. There's a whole big long backstory about how the Davy Jones ferrymen can only come onto land, once every 10 years, and this polyamorous relationship had a child, and the child comes onto land every 10 years. There's this whole big long thing that takes pages and pages of background information and stuff to get through, and it's not really relevant to the actual adventure, which is very disappointing considering how much the designer clearly cares about this relationship and is excited about introducing these characters, and then it's not really relevant to what's going on. And you'd think the whole pirate theme would play into this adventure a little more, and it really doesn't. It's really more about this mini quest into the Fae realm, and that's the whole adventure. It's odd. So we get some information about the town and NPCs. There's a lot of description about NPCs. Again, it's meant to be a very narrative heavy and very role play heavy adventure. So you want to talk to all these townsfolk. And in fact, there's an appendix at the end that includes pages of background and traits and all that stuff for all the major characters. Although, keep in mind, some of these characters you don't meet until the epilogue. Again, it's just not that relevant to what's happening in the context of this one adventure. I don't know if the designer had grand plans for a bigger adventure that included these characters more, and this was just a tiny slice offering. But it was weird that we got all of this very heavy, detailed, cool character information, and then it doesn't really matter in the context of this adventure. The only one that matters is one of the characters, the one who's in charge of the town, is the quest-giving NPC, and he's missing the son of this relationship, who is now a 19-year-old. He's just been missing. So that is the start of the adventure. The players arrive at this cool seaside town that's very diverse and has a lot of merchants, and there's this fun little courier character that's like super fast and excitable and chews gum and runs around. Like, again, a lot of the characters are very fun and cool, but the first act is literally you're just trying to find there's a missing, the missing son, and you haven't even gotten a chance to talk to the quest giving NPC yet. You have the idea is you have to wait for him just to arrive at like midnight that night on a boat because he's been searching for his son. And there's only 2 characters that have any relevant information about that, and they both basically say you just need to wait until this dude comes back and can tell you anything. So automatically the players can't really do anything. You're just waiting for the story to continue. I don't like that. Then, once this character, and again, I like the characters. They're very fun. They're very cool. There's a lot of information about them. Once he tells the players about, here is the quest. I'm missing my son. Now, please, can you go get some information on, maybe you've got some leads or something. And the players can go around the village and talk to all these cool characters and get some information and try to figure out what's going on. And again, they don't get to know anything. There's no clues. There's nothing they can learn. The only thing they learn is that one of the merchants is missing, whom was last seen talking to the son, whose name is Kid. But you can't do anything about that. You just have to wait for this merchant to come stumbling in the nearby forest. And he's been gone for 2 weeks, and he looks all disheveled, and he's muttering, and he's been, basically had an interaction with the Fae there. And you have to bring him to Desmond, and then the merchant, I forget the merchant's name, Roy, will then tell about the fact that the son is back in the Feywild, and you need to go back there, and there's the quest. So the players have done nothing, basically, to earn any of this or find out this information. It's just things that are happening to them as the players just kind of idly having the story unfold. I don't like that. Now, some folks may like that. Some groups may really appreciate that. Again, very role-play heavy groups. Maybe you just want to experience this, this very immersive town and these characters and just kind of, have a chat with folks. But I feel like even if you like that, you'd still want to be able to progress the story on your own. You want to find clues, and be able to find objects and treat it like, I don't know, an adventure game or something. But instead, you're just kind of waiting around for things to happen. And then once that finally happens, we get to Act 2, which is you have to go into the forest, into the Fey realm. So we are leaving the entire pirate theme behind completely at that point. Like, we've got this cool little pirate town, but we have left that behind, and now we're going into pure Fey-themed adventure, which is actually where this adventure takes place. And it's very, very short. Now, we had, again, you can take a while in that town if you want, meet all those characters and have fun doing that. Totally fine. But the actual adventure is just this mini Fey area where Kid is being basically held captive by an Eladrin elf. There's a maze, which you may think, okay, now we're getting a little bit of a dungeon crawl. We're going to get some interesting stuff going on, maybe some cool Fey things happening. This maze is almost completely empty. I was crushed because I thought, okay, a Fey forest maze is a great theme to use. It's definitely a bit cliche, but there's always interesting things you can do there. And it does remind me of, I'll use the adventure game thing, those classic adventure games, Quest for Glory, King's Quest, that used those maze screens where you were going in one, different directions, and it was kind of a similar looking screen. Reminds me of that, but of course those had encounters and different areas you could find. In this case, there are 0 encounters, 0. And only in rooms 1 and 5 on the ends are there interesting things, in which case, basically 2 kind of items you can grab. One of them is a fountain you can bottle the water, and the other one is a certain kind of like a vine you can hack up. And both of those turn into basically unique magic items, which that's cool, but there's nothing else of note. Each of these areas that you can see with the openings, which is kind of in a hex grid formation, are separated by fog, and if you enter the fog, you just exit back out into that same room. What you're supposed to do is lift up this stone in the middle of each area and then turn it to where the long end is pointing towards the opening you want to go to, and then the fog lifts and you can go. That's the entire puzzle. So the only thing the player, and what's weird is the part of the description, which I would argue that these descriptions are all way too long. The designer gets a little carried away when it comes to these. I mean, these are paragraphs and paragraphs of descriptive text and also dialogue, which I think is just too much of the DM talking. In this case, the important information that the players are supposed to learn from this description is glossed over in like half a sentence. It's like there's a dip in the high line of grass around the center of the clearing. Moss peeks out from the dip. And then it immediately talks about the lights and the songs and the music. Like, that's the one piece of information the players are supposed to glom on. Otherwise, they're just like, okay, what do we do here? How do we do the fog? I guess we'll need to, you almost need to remind them of like, oh, remember that dip I told you about? Like, well, make that more obvious. Like, say there's this noticeable rock that's shaped, like an arrow pointing in the middle of the clearing. And that's the entire puzzle, is they have to figure out, they have to be able to turn this thing, which it turns pretty easily on an axis. There's no penalty for taking too long. There's no, encounters. There's no nothing. So you just eventually figure out, okay, you need to point this stone in a certain direction and make it through there. The only thing the players don't know is they have to make it to the top into 3A, and then they go. So they're just kind of wandering around this maze. But again, there's no, I don't know, it's just really dissatisfying. It felt like there could have been some really interesting encounters or things happening here. You do find a map of the area in 3B in the middle, which is kind of a fun way, and I like how the bees can represent the players, like a little honeycomb, and it ends up being a map of the outer area. That's kind of fun, but there's just nothing else going on in here. So I thought ultimately that was a disappointing event, and unfortunately that's pretty much the only one, because once you make it past that maze, you make it into the final area, which I don't think this map is embedded until the end area. But you meet the Eladrin, who is keeping Kid prisoner, and she's a classic, like, oh, just stay a while and play. And of course, her play is anything from, torture to violence and all that. It's just all in fun, which is, a fun and appropriate Fae attitude to have, for sure. And it just turns into a combat encounter, as she summons there's some statues that she's petrified of people that, when she grows bored with them, so they turn into stone cursed. She's got darklings as minions. She actually doesn't fight herself, which is interesting. It's just a bunch of minions. Now, keep in mind, I said this was a tier 2 adventure, and the only reason I know that is because this battle scales from level 5 to 10. Otherwise, I would have no clue. Like, there are a few, like, insight and, checks here and there before we made it to this point, but otherwise, I had no clue what actual level this adventure was. I do appreciate that this scales, but obviously tier 2, I was like, oh, I guess it's tier 2, because the one combat encounter here is at scaled from level 5 to 10 with multiple numbers of party members. Once they finish this fight, she disappears, so there is no real final boss fight, and it gets even a little bit more dissatisfying with that, because you then save the sun, and then you have to make it back out of the maze. So now I'm thinking, okay, now are we going to get interesting with her jacking with the party? And she mentioned the fact that she'd steal memories from them. Occasionally she'll spawn in a room, and I thought, okay, this is going to be really interesting. And it's not. Because they make it out of the maze. It's essentially the same formation. I think a few of the doors are closed in the middle. That's about it. And basically you roll on a d6, and if it's a 1 or 2, then she's in the room, and she will steal a memory from somebody, like Neverending Story style, and then disappears. Now, this has no mechanical factor whatsoever. It's just a buy-in from the players to that they lose a memory, and they have to, like, role play that, and that's it. And then there's no final confrontation with her. Eventually they just make it out of the maze, and that's it. It's really anticlimactic and weird. Like, there's no, you don't get a final fight with her. There's no chance to attack her or do anything. It's just that she will fuck with the players while they're trying to escape in a very annoying way, and then steal their memories, which doesn't have any repercussions technically, mechanically. And then that's it. They make it out, and they escape. So again, I thought this was just mostly dissatisfying way of handling this maze. Another example of how the players don't have a lot of choice in the matter or interactivity is that the I think it's the father will want to accompany the players to the Fae realm, because he's very concerned about his son and wants to rescue them. So as the players are following with the merchant, Desmond will also follow with them, but he's supposed to have all this levels of exhaustion. Even if the players can see that he's exhausted, he'll still refuse. There's no check the players can make to stop him from coming. And then right before they make it to the Fae realm, he will collapse. And then the players are supposed to suddenly realize he's actually got like 4 levels of exhaustion. And then it's the other NPC who will convince him to stay behind. And the players have no checks or choices to make. Don't do that. Damn it. You're overriding things. You're not trusting your players to make decisions. Essentially, you're letting these NPCs interact and the players are just kind of sitting back and watching scenes unfold. You can do that in an adventure, but you have to do that very sparingly for very important moments, and not for just, why not let the players make that choice? Or if the players really want him to come, and maybe they're more, darker mercenary type players, and they're like, get your shit together, come on, man, let's go with you, and let him come, and then maybe he'll get killed on the way there or something. Like, you have to be able, if you're writing an adventure versus a novel, you have to be able to let your players make some of those choices that you might not necessarily agree with or anticipate. Like, that, it really bugged me here, that this moment especially bugged me, because it was the fact that the players have no choice, but this second NPC tags along, and then in a scripted event, that NPC collapses, and it's the other NPC that has to convince the first NPC to then like say, no man, stay behind, you'll end up like me, and I got crazy from the Fae realm, and then what if you get killed and all that. Like that should be the players being able to make that choice and have that dialogue and that RP, not between NPCs. So that's an example of why that stuff kind of drove me crazy about not having enough. It's just way too linear. And then once we get to the actual mini, Fae Maze dungeon crawl, I found that mostly disappointing. This battle right here is fine. I thought this was fun. It's a bunch of, I love kind of boss battles that summon up different minions and creatures and things, and then having her disappear is all very cool and final battle-ish. But then the actual return to the maze is very anticlimactic. I don't like her popping up and just, stealing memories. And then the adventure does end on a high note. I will say that it's a very narrative-heavy adventure. It's exceedingly linear, which does lend itself to a very lengthy, satisfying, sweet epilogue in which the Davy Jones character does land. It's a happy reunion for the family, and they dole out a lot of really great magic items for the players. I believe each one of them has like an important thing to give them. I laughed out loud at Davy Jones's locker room. I thought that was really funny, and it's basically like a Leoman's tiny hut kind of a thing. But really cool magic items that the players can be rewarded with way more than they deserve, frankly, for this adventure. From all of them, they have a big feast. They get to like have mass heal cast on them. It's a huge, big epilogue, and there's even a little optional thing where if the players if the boss fight had used the Darkling Elder, there's a chance where the Darklings go down. The Elder says, "Oh, we're being killed, mistress, help us," and the Eladrin, doesn't give a shit, so she's just like, whatever, and he turns on her, and then he disappeared. Maybe the players help him. There's this whole optional epilogue where maybe he appears at the end and even gives them a magic item for helping him, free himself of the Fae. So all that is very, very cool, but so much before that I was not a big fan of. We do get maps. This is the map for the final boss fight, and of course you saw the maps for the gardens. They're not very attractive maps. They're very small. They've got the DM things on there, but at least we've got, full color maps. I appreciate that. We do have stat blocks repeated here, which is always nice, from either Monster Manual or Volos, although I believe it says on there, Stone Cursed is from Mordenkainen's. And this is what I was talking about with the pages and pages, 3 full pages of NPC profiles of several NPCs that do not appear until the epilogue, by the way. That Davy Jones character and the Satyr character, 2 of the 3 of this relationship, do not appear until the epilogue, and none of this really matters. The only thing that matters is the fact that the Davy Jones character has only 1 day to spend on land, and so you've got technically a timer to find the sun, and there's a sense of urgency there. But I mean, there would really always be a sense of urgency to finding like a youth anyway. Like a missing person kind of always has a sense of urgency anyway. So none of this is particularly relevant in the context of the story, which is why it's so odd that we spend so much time building up this information for all these characters and their relationship and their background, all this, and none of it really matters. It's just you're going a missing person, you're kind of along for the ride, and you do this little Fae adventure, you rescue the son, who isn't really a character in the context of this. He's not like tagging along the whole time. The only one that is tagging along is the stupid merchant, I believe, who probably is the least interesting character of everybody. And then you do have the son on the way back, but he's kind of out of it for most of it. So it really just didn't work for me for the most part, although I do like these magic items that are included, including the 2 that you can grab from the Fae maze. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Sea Among Fae. Pro: detailed NPC descriptions, including 3 pages of profiles. This is a pro, and I include it as a pro because it's very nice to see all this information used for PCs, but as you'll see later in my cons, it's not actually relevant, but clearly there's a lot of care and time given to creating interesting NPCs that are designed to be, a lot of role-playing and hugely helpful for DMs to really embody. It's just weird that like half of them don't even appear really in the context of the story. Pro: unique and interesting magic items. I really like the magic items here. There's a lot of really unique ones. It's not just, hey, you get a +1 sword, or you get the, whatever that appears in the Dungeon Master's Guide. A lot of, designers do that, and that's fine. There's a lot of great items in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but I really appreciate when people create unique magic items that are memorable from that story, and then you can remember whenever you've got that item. Oh, remember when we got this from, the Sea Among Fae adventure. And these really feel like that. There's a lot of really fun, unique items that also reward the players for exploring more of the maze, even though I don't think the maze is that interesting. And pro, I included the epilogue as a pro. A lot of folks don't have much of an epilogue. You know, it's usually just like a paragraph or something as you turn the quest in and you're done. In this case, this is a full like 3 pages really of epilogue where you've got that really nice touching moment where all the family members come together and they feast and they celebrate and they give out magic items. You know, that's kind of the pro half of having a very linear, story heavy adventure, is that you know how it's going to end and you can thus create and write a pretty lengthy, satisfying ending, which is what's happened here. Cons: the story is excessively linear and lacks in player choice or interactivity. It's a huge problem that I had. It's a problem I have for a lot of narrative-focused adventures, because how are you going to include the players if you're writing so much story and you need things to happen in a certain way? There are ways to do that. It's just very challenging, where you have to create branching paths. And in this case, it doesn't try to do any of that at all. It's just like, no, here's what's happening, and the players are just along for the ride. In several instances where there should have been choices that the players are making, there's not. And then with the Fae Maze, which is the one where you can have the most player choice because you are exploring, you're checking off that exploration checkbox, there's nothing there. It's mostly empty. Like you can get those 2 possible magic items if you go in those directions. There's no encounters, there's no puzzles, there's no riddles. The actual way to like open each door is extremely easy. You could have done the thing where the classic like multiple levers thing, and maybe one lever opens one door and closes another, and make it a little more interesting and have to get around certain ways, or maybe force it where the party has to be split up at some instances and have at least one goddamn encounter in there. But no, it's not. It's just mostly empty and dissatisfying. That was my second con, by the way. And the third con is that descriptions and dialogues are too wordy and the font is too small. Something I didn't mention yet is the fact that this is too tiny of a font. Stop doing that. Make it bigger. If I can't really read it very easily at this default 78% view or whatever it is that I used to review on the PDF, it's too dang small. And in this case, a lot of these descriptions are way too big, especially when it comes to the text that the DM is supposed to talk. It's just too much DM talky, I think. You're overpainting everything way too much. You're not focusing on the things that are relevant. And a good example of that is the fact that in the Fae Maze description, the one relevant piece of information is that stone in the middle, and it's glossed over in the middle of trying to describe everything else that's, you know, all these other senses that are bombarding the players. It's good to paint evocative imagery in word form, but don't overdo that. It's a little too self-indulgent on the DM's end. Final verdict: the Sea Among Fae is so focused on its characters and their mostly irrelevant backstories that it nearly forgets about the G in RPG. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Thomas, Captain Mike, Adam, Aiden, Instant Lose, Smaug, Roger, Stan, and Nathan. And gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos, Dave, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy 619, Skinny Nick, Funny McButterpants, Blood, Angel, Varunus, Babin, Baboon, Shiny, K, Cert, 2B, Nathan, and Fast Like a Tortoise. Thank you all very much for your support.